Hi everyone, welcome back to installment 2 of Should You Loctite It, I guess. I don't know. I put a video out last week because I had captured a piece of video where I had sheared off a bolt in my ACOG and the thing was basically flopping around. I was like, oh, we can turn this into a Loctite video. You know, put something out on Christmas Day for those of you who are avoiding hanging out with your in-laws. You're welcome. Several people who left comments along the lines of, hey, is there an exhaustive list of stuff that we should be Loctiting? And I was like, that is a fantastic idea for a video, particularly because I haven't finished this week's project yet. I'm being a sissy and it's far too cold outside to do night vision work right now. Also, I would like to add that no liability on my point whatsoever. If the manufacturer of your specific item tells you to not thread lock that thing, then you have a decision to make. What I'm going to tell you to do might void your warranty. Red thread locker is going to be your gold standard. You use it on everything that needs to be thread locked unless you have an exception. The exceptions are as follows. 1, whatever you're Loctiting into place is heat sensitive, as in it will be damaged in some way, shape, or form by the heat needed to loosen that thread locker red. You also have the exception of the item that you're going to thread lock into place that by its very operation is going to reach a level of heat that is sufficient to melt that thread locker red. So that's obviously not going to work very well. You're going to need something a little bit more robust. Anything that is mounted directly to your receiver rail, as in your upper receiver rail on the actual receiver, you can use blue Loctite on. That part of the gun does not get very hot. I don't care if you're running the gun fully automatic, suppressed in the middle of the summer in Texas. It's not getting very hot right there. Blue Loctite is more than sufficient to secure those things into place. What you're really looking for when you do thread locking on any of those components is that the recoil of the firearm doesn't cause the screw to rattle loose. And that's really what you're going for. You're not really looking to resist any kind of heat, expansion, contraction, any of that sort of stuff. So those are things like your optics mounts, particularly for your RDS, but also on your scope rings and things like that. You want to use a blue Loctite or something like that. Now, your red Loctite is usually relegated to areas that get hot. So like anything that is mounted to your rail, anything that is mounted to the forward handguard, your front sight often needs some red Loctite on it. But you can also consider things like rails, flashlight mounts, things like that, that are going to be exposed to a little bit of heat. Go ahead and red Loctite those in place. And then that compound that resists heat, those compounds are going to be relegated to things that are mounted directly to the barrel, as in they're going to be in direct contact with the heat source. So things like your gas block mounting screws and your suppressor mounts. As I mentioned previously, there are some things that it will be mentioned directly by a manufacturer that they don't want you to put Loctite on. And we need to do a cost-benefit analysis on why it is they're telling us to do that or not to do that. Let's take the example of like a micro red dot. That manufacturer has included tiny little screws and they're concerned that you are going to strip them out by putting blue Loctite on them, probably because they skimped on you and gave you hex head bolts instead of Torx bit screws. Any tiny little screw like that should be a Torx head screw so that you can give extra torque to be able to hold that precision thing into place. It's an aiming device. That is not a good reason not to put blue Loctite on there. You need to be careful in that situation. Apply minor amounts of heat when you go to remove those screws. Be careful that you don't strip those things out. Shame on them for not giving you the correct equipment because they want to save a couple cents. There are things that are engineered in a way that you don't need Loctite to hold them in place, and my rule is basically does have a spring in it. Let's take, for instance, the example of a normal claw mount. 2 pieces of metal with a bolt through it. That thing is going to need some assistance, right? Because it's going to rattle loose. If I was using one of those mounts to secure my power tack to the front of the rifle to use it as a weapon light, for instance, discount code and affiliates page listed in the description box down below. But if we just simply add a spring to that situation, like with this TLR1HL here, this is, again, a claw mount, 2 pieces of metal with a bolt, but it has a spring between the bolt and the housing. That thing is going to provide continuous tension on those threads, causing them to bind. And this thing has been riding on the front of that SBR over there for like 4 years, never had a problem, and it only gets applied hand tight. If you are installing a barrel into an upper receiver, you Do not put any drop of any locking compound of any kind on that barrel extension. I know that there are some examples out there of some high-end manufacturers using this method to bed their barrels using compounds that we've discussed already. Say it with me, you are not that guy. I don't care how good you think you are. I don't care how good you think your mommy is. If you were, then you would be doing this professionally. I had a dude drop by probably 4 years ago now, and he had an AR built by his gunsmith. And for any of you who don't know what that means that I built this in my mommy's basement. I didn't have half the tools I need or half the brain cells to do it. So I dicked it up along the way. It's not working. I need your help to fix it. So I cracked this thing open and it is covered in red Loctite residue. It smells like red Loctite. You can see it on everything. Everything's tacky and sticky. What had happened was this idiot read on the internet somewhere that you should bed your barrel in there, and in many cases they'll use Rockset to do this. And he's like, I don't even know what Rockset is, and the internet says that it's really hard to remove, and because of that I got the next best thing over here. Rockset's really expensive, so I'm just going to use red Loctite. That shit melted and redistributed itself all over the inside of that gun over the course of 1,000 or so rounds, and that gun is now unsavable. Can't be done. Get a new one, just forget about it. The amount of hours that I would have to put into scrubbing that thing with a torch, you're going to be able to buy a new gun for my wage on that. So the moral of the story here is don't do stupid shit that you read on the internet that you don't really know what it means. Another example of stupid crap that you read on the internet that you just don't do is you never put any locking compound on the junction between your upper receiver and your barrel nut. That thing is designed to be held on with torque and torque only. And the reason that's important is if you forget that you put that crap on there and you forget to heat it up before you remove it, or if you put Rockset on there and you forget to dunk it in water for several hours before you do it, and you go to break it free, there's a high likelihood that you will spring or crack your upper receiver because your upper receiver is made out of aluminum. This one might make you manufacturers out there mad, so if you're a manufacturer of AR parts, I apologize in advance, sorry I ruined your day, but if you are a AR parts manufacturer and you are manufacturing a handguard that requires locking compound to be applied to the external diameter of that barrel nut so they can then interface with the inside diameter of that handguard so that you can keep it timed properly, you are wrong. It is 2022. There's some kind of other engineering jiggery poofery that you could have perpetrated to keep that rail into place without having to glue it there. When it comes to just about everything else, I consider it discretionary on whether you should Loctite that or not. A good example of something you might consider Loctiting would be if you have any of those threaded retainers for your small pins in your AR lower, those should probably get some blue. Same thing if you've got a threaded retainer for your ping pong paddle. One thing that's a little bit controversial is the castle nut on the receiver extension. That should be staked. Absolutely, unequivocally should be staked, but sometimes even if it's properly staked, there'll be some play. You can secure that with some red or blue Loctite, preferably on the red on that one, to give it a little bit more rigidity. I'm trying to keep videos under 10 minutes these days to work with the brain damage that's resulted from TikTok, but I'd like to switch gears to the pistol really quick, talk about two things that you can reliably use red Loctite on. The first is the sights. Obviously, those things are mounted directly to your slide. The slide gets hot. You're going to want to secure those with red Loctite. And the other thing is if you have one of those after-factory guide rods that has a threaded screw at the front, a lot of times those ones that allow you to change the spring tensions will have a quick thread on it so that you can just take it apart. That should have some red Loctite on. Just about everything else on your pistols can be blue Loctited into place. The last thing that everybody misses, I want you to go get your holster right now. Test all the junctions. I guarantee you have one that if you haven't put blue Loctite on is loose. And I'll leave you with this really quick story. I was rolling down the road about a year ago and I was going to be in the vehicle for like 6 hours. So I took my gun off and put it underneath the seat. And about an hour into the trip, I slammed on my brakes and the holster came skipping out from underneath of the seat, and that gun came partially out of the holster. That's a scary situation, very dangerous, so make sure that the retention screws on your holsters are properly maintained. And smear some blue Loctite on those screws for good measure.